Hello YouTubers, this is Russell Goslin coming again to talk about modeling. I want to kind of change the pace a little bit on this video. I just recently was watching some videos, new videos I'll add, from a fellow named Colorado Hobbyist. And he's new, well, not new, but he's returned back to the hobby of model building. And he made a very good observation that it sort of dawned on me after watching it, was a lot of the videos on YouTube, which is wonderful and great. Sometimes I think we need to think about who's watching these videos, and there's probably a lot of new people, maybe some youth, people who have been long removed from the hobby and are coming back to it. And Colorado Hobbyist had a good point. Sometimes it can be a little intimidating watching some of these videos on YouTube where they're using a lot of advanced techniques, and I don't know. I mean, I think I agree with Colorado Hobbyist that it's kind of a shame that we should have some more videos for people who are new to the hobby or just returning from a very long hiatus. And I think I spent a little bit tossing and turning, you would say, one night in bed, because I was thinking to myself, it's very antithetical for what I consider the good that I'm doing to make these videos. I want to share my experiences and share my experiences and things with model building. And I'd be really, really upset if somebody was watching them and said, I just can't reach that summit. This guy's building models at a pace that's too fast for me, too much experience, too advanced. And that'd be kind of upsetting for me, because I think we should encourage the hobby as much as possible. I do have my father is a very long time standing member of a train collecting group, and as a child I would go to these trade meets all across the country. And recently, talking with him the past few years, and all the members are getting very old, and there's not a lot of new, young, vibrant blood in the hobby as a whole. Sure, there's a few here and there, but not enough to, I think, have the hobby continue over the next decades. And that's kind of alarming. I think it's really good to have a good mix of all types of people: young people, old people, people in the middle, people returning after a lot of other life experiences. So what I was thinking of doing was making a few videos every now and then that are really geared for the novice, people who are new or young to the hobby. I think there's a lot of skills that I just take for granted now. I really don't think about X-Acto blades anymore. It just happens. It's very fluid. There's a lot of skills that I just don't think about anymore. It's become old hat, routine, and maybe that's a danger that or something we take for granted and we should kind of work on. So today I just wanted to start off on the basic elements of the blades, working with knives and pliers. And I hope you can see this. Unfortunately, my cutting board, the contrast, it's kind of white with my table. I think I may have to change that in the future. But here we go. As a child working with models, this pretty much was the tool. My father and my brothers all built models, and this was the only kind of blade that I ever saw. I wasn't really quite aware that there was a whole array of blades out there on the market for all types of different cutting techniques. And one of the disadvantages I found to this blade was that it's very pointy and narrow at the tip. And when you're cutting sprue, you're gonna run into a lot of breaking of these tips, constantly pushing down, applying pressure, and it's just going to snap. And when it snaps and breaks, your knife's probably going to go either into the model or into your finger, which we really don't want that to happen. Like again, I used this a lot as a child, and I used a lot of Band-Aids and having some really nasty cuts. So for some time now, I have been using the round blade. I don't know what the actual technical number is. I think when I write up the description for my this YouTube video, I'll have these blades labeled by their universal category number, whatever it is. I think it's a number 17. I really don't know. But it's a round blade, and if you notice, I don't know if you can see it, but when you come down for your cutting, you know, it's a nice round shape coming down, and the tip is not going to break. You get a lot of girth on that blade, and so you can put a lot of pressure and chop right down. Also, if you noticed, this handle is a lot thicker as opposed to the other X-Acto blade. The handle is a lot smaller, narrower, and we'll go into how that's to be used. But this has a nice, good chopping motion, and it's really good for that kind of stuff. So what do I use this blade for? Well, I pretty much use it for everything else. A lot of fine detail cutting and carving with sprues. And we'll get into that one in just a minute. And the third blade that I use, I only use it once in a while, is the chisel blade. And I've recently been using it for two types of manufacturers who build military models. Is Italeri and AFV Club. Both have, how would I call them? They're raised guidelines for armored vehicles. For usually they're on exterior and interior panels where you can attach parts. For example, I have this half-track from AFV, and all these components, you have the rifle rack and the Schmeiser, these all have guidelines that were raised on the panel. And what happens is these parts actually don't fit flush with the panel. They kind of come in cockeyed. And that leads to a few problems. A, when the glue goes onto the surface of the panel, it's not flush, and your joint is going to be very weak. And over time, with manhandling, these parts are going to come off. Secondly, the guidelines, well, let's just start off with manufacturing. This half-track has many variants, and AFV Club has manufactured many of the variants. I think quite a few pieces of them. And to save money with manufacturing, they just keep on molding the same main chassis hull. And so they put all the guidelines, these raised guidelines, for all the different parts for different variants. So I had guidelines that have no relevance to this particular variant of half-track, so those lines would be exposed. So that's where my chisel blade comes in. And I attach it to this main blade, which, well, yeah. So I attach it to that and kind of work it like a plane. If you anybody out there has works with carpentry, a planer kind of works the same motion, and just make these nice flush movements and to knock out these lines. I certainly start off at probably a very small angle, maybe 10-15 degrees, just to start my motion, and slowly wearing off little pieces of these raised lines. Then once I'm a little bit more comfortable, I'll probably raise that angle to about 45 degrees and get it off nice and smooth. And once it's pretty much down, you can use sandpaper or files, jeweler files, to get that line nice and flush and smooth. And don't worry about the guidelines. You might say, oh, well, the guidelines are gone, and where am I supposed to put the part? Oftentimes the instructions have the guidelines already drawn in there, and to be honest, even though I've worn off these guidelines, there's still some impression in there, so you can eyeball it pretty well without any serious problems. So I just want to talk about those 3 blades. And before we do any cutting, I kind of forgot about it, but once you open up that box, you want to get model building. So you want to start off with your pliers. I would recommend, these are not the best pliers. Some of my tools go back probably 30 years, and I wouldn't recommend this kind of bulky flush cutter. I think if you go to your local hobby shop, they have much better snips out on the market. But I tend to be sentimental about some of my tools I've had for a long time, so I use it anyway. So we talked about snips and blades, and secondly, what should I talk about? Safety. I was very concerned about safety. Wearing safety goggles is a pretty good thing. I think I should probably wear them more often. I have my regular glasses that I use, and they do okay, but probably not the ideal. So I can always recommend using safety glasses. When you're cutting parts off the sprue, they are going to fly. And occasionally, there may be that 1 in a million chance that's going to go right into your eye and may even cause damage. And that'd be a real shame to lose some vision, have some impairment by just a careless mistake. Secondly, these parts are going to fly, and I know throughout all the model building forums and magazines and the media, the carpet monster will take pieces. They fly off the workbench, they end up on the floor. There are many articles and discussions throughout, again, the media talking about ways of restricting that from happening. I've certainly lost tons of parts as a kid to the basement, and decades later, helping my parents clean up the basement, and I found these parts, and like, wow, I was really worried about this piece 20 years ago. But it just happens, and perhaps that might be for another video, talking about some of the funny things that happens on the workbench. But just to wrap up, I'm just going to show a little bit about cutting. Again, for the new model builder, having a good cutting board is vital. It doesn't have to be anything fancy that you might see at the hobby shops, though I am considering getting one only to have a nice contrast. I have white cutting board, white table. I'm not too sure if you can see this on YouTube, but get some kind of cutting device. This is actually just a cooking chopping board. One of the reasons I do like this one is that it's raised. It's got, maybe close to an inch of height, and that sometimes serves as a pretty good utility when it comes to taking off parts from sprues. Sprues have a topography all of their own. It's not necessarily straight. There's a lot of ejection pin marks and things that give a height to it. So when you put it on their thing, it's very loose. It's kind of wiggles. And when you're cutting, you want to have complete control of the part that you're cutting from. And this is not very safe, for you, and the part that you want might get damaged in the process, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. And there's all kinds of ways of doing this. By no means is my way the right way or a better way. I think there's probably dozens of different methods. If you read the books out there, some say don't use a snip cutter, cut right with a knife. It's all a matter of taste and style, which you will find on your own what is comfortable for you.